how do you start hitting some of these numbers? What's the approach you can take? You can kind of ignore the sort of 99% and below. Most people in this room probably aren't interested in those numbers, and frankly, they're easy. You've got so much time to respond to stuff that you can just have a single box sat in your cupboard doing the job. And
I met an encoding vendor a year or so back, whose name should definitely remain nameless, who I sort of said, oh, so what do you do when an encoder fails? And he says, oh, what we do is we send an engineer into the room and they take the SDI cable out of that one and they put it into the replacement and they turn it back on again. And they called it orchestration by human being, which is kind of, yeah. Kubernetes is not, but you know, whatever.
Yeah, it works, it works. And if you can cope with that, that's a really good way to do it. At 99.9, your time's getting limited. Knowing what period your SLA is measured over starts becoming very interesting. If you're measured, let me hop backwards, where are we? Where's 99.9? If you're measured per day, frankly, it's still pretty easy. You've got 1.4 minutes. If your SLA is over the course of a month, and assuming you're not going wrong every single day, you've got 10 minutes to spare. So 99.9, if you're very organized and you plan what you're going to do, you can probably still get away with a fairly simplistic approach to delivering that sort of number. That's not particularly hard. Once you get up to 4 nines, it starts becoming out of the realms of human control. You can't have orchestration by human beings at that point. There's simply not time to respond. You've got to have multiple systems live the whole time. You've got to have things active, ready to take over when stuff goes wrong. At a 99.99, you might get away with something like an N+1 model, where you've got a bunch of live systems and a couple of hot spares that are sat there running, and if one of the live ones goes wrong, you commission one of the hot spares and you're up and running quickly enough. But you're certainly in a world where you're going to have some form of distributed system. You've got multiple computers, you've got multiple things ready to go, ability to deploy on the fly, ability to spot the errors automatically and recover from them automatically.
You get some interesting cultural challenges there. We had one customer where we were deploying an N+1 solution for them for that sort of level of SLA. And they said, but when we're showing customers around our data center, how do we tell them which is their encoder? And it's, well, you don't, because there isn't a their encoder, because as soon as there's a their encoder, when that one dies,
what do you do?
What do you do? It's going to have to move somewhere else. And in order to have it move, a running job move from one server that's just died to another server and have that happen in the course of a fraction of a second, or maybe a second or two, ain't no human being involved in that, at which point the whole notion of this piece of infrastructure is delivering this part of my server just doesn't make sense anymore. And I kid you not, what we ended up having to do for them was we came up with this concept of preferred encoder, that if things were all normal and we had lots and lots of green lights everywhere, then this would be the BBC's encoder, and you could show them around your data center and go, it's that one. They had a label maker and everything.
Yep. We suggested they just stuck the labels on, but that wasn't enough. They actually really wanted it to be real. At 5 nines, you've got to have multiple live systems. You've got to have A/B systems running the whole time. You've really got no choice. It's almost impossible, again, depending on where your SLA is measured, but if you assume you're down at a sort of daily level, the reality is you've got 0.86 of a second to respond. And that's not just to respond, that's to detect and respond. So you've got to spot that something's gone wrong, fix it, and have the end service back up and running before your 0.86 of a second is up. That's very little time to do anything, particularly on wide area networks and so on. You've got ping times measured in 100 odd milliseconds. You've only got 860 milliseconds to do it all. That's not long. So you really need A/B systems. You've got to have multiple systems live delivering the service the whole time.